I have a panel here of people from the industry with regard to technology. I have type 1 diabetes and have had type 1 diabetes for 31 years, and I'm very fortunate for all the technology that's been made available to us throughout time. I think as a clinician, Dr. Hirsch, myself, this is a big question that faces a lot of patients, a lot of families. Do I feel like it's time, or is it okay for me to advance with these technologies, these other devices on me, the self-consciousness of all of these things? And so the opportunity is here now for anyone in the audience to ask any questions about that. Now, next slide, please. We do ask that you try not to make the questions personal, as like in the sense that it's one question with one sentence length. Additional concerns are more than welcome to be addressed after the session. There are industry tables out there for each individual product, if you have a product in particular that you're interested in. And then we're going to give you a reference card through the JDRF that has links to all these wonderful technological companies. So without further ado, I would like to have Kelly Close come up and introduce herself and say hi. You have a microphone on, so you just have to...
I have a microphone on. How amazing to be here. So I love Michigan. I've always wanted to come to Detroit. Dr. Grunberger has been so inspiring to me, and I know that, of course, everybody knows how incredible Dr. Brennan is as well. And you have just like the whole Michigan. I don't know, it's kind of an aura of all of the important research that is being done in your state. So you guys are really lucky. What an honor for me to get to actually speak up here with Dr. Brennan and with all of these amazing, amazing people who are so devoted to helping us patients do better. So I've had diabetes myself almost 35 years. I was just telling my kids actually the other day about how I would get inter-office, like interlibrary loans. Like that's kind of how I learned about diabetes. I had just gone into college, and so many different things have happened since then. And like the community has been the biggest part, that us patients actually get to talk to each other, and that our care partners around us also get to talk to each other. So I started Diatribe in 2006, and that's a newsletter for patients so that we understand more about what's going on in the world of diabetes. It's free. It used to go out once a quarter. Now it goes out every week to almost 200,000 patients. And what we do is we get to fly all over the world. I have a small team in San Francisco, and we get to fly all over the world and see researchers, clinical experts, industry experts speak about what is coming next. And I just also want to say we have been so incredibly moved by Dr. Hirsch, because there has been no one that has propelled, health as a human right and diabetes for all of us, every single person with diabetes, to get exactly what they need. I have been lucky myself to have benefited from things like Loop, things like, pumps from decades ago, CGM from the very beginning. And I'm excited just to share anything from a patient perspective, but with all of these experts up here, God, this is an amazing chance for you to ask questions to all of them. And if you don't have enough questions, I'll definitely get down there and ask them some myself. So please sign up for Diatribe. It's a 501c3, just diatribe.org. And that I will hand it back to Dr. Brennan and to everyone else on the stage.
So one other thing we have to acknowledge is that if you are asking a question, this is all going to be recorded and placed on the JDRF website. So that being said, too, you have to understand that there are some questions that even the industry experts can't necessarily answer, and that would be things with regard to labeling and Federal Drug Administration and things like that. People like myself and Dr. Hirsch can make clinical advice questions, okay, and give our opinion with regard to some of these questions. But with regard to off-label subjects, we have to be mindful of the answers that can be given. And sometimes I can't comment is a completely fine answer from the industry folk, okay? So without further ado, does anybody want to just approach the microphone and start? We have a variety of people here that are from 2 of the 3 pump companies, 2 of the 3 continuous glucose monitors, and we'll go from there.
Can they introduce
Sure.
themselves?
Why don't you guys take the mic
I would
here?
love it if you would. We're so grateful that you're here.
Yeah.
I'm Tom Grossman. I work for Dexcom. I have type 1 diabetes myself, and I've had it for 37 years now.
I'm Cindy Schroeder. I actually work for Eversense, and I am a diabetes educator and registered dietitian by trade. I actually have 2 daughters with type 1 diabetes for 30 years now and 15 years. And just disclaimer, I do not have type 1 diabetes.
And just for those who don't know, because we assume people know, but Dexcom and Eversense are continuous glucose monitoring companies, okay?
I'm Garrett Ingram, the Chief Marketing Officer for Mankind, and we make inhaled insulin. I'm very excited to be here. I've been personally and professionally touched by diabetes for all of my life, and I would say for the last 30 years personally.
I'm John Kaza. I work for Medtronic. I've had type 1 diabetes for 22 years now. And drawing a blank, anything else?
Sounds
Chad Shinovar with Omnipod. I've had diabetes 33 years. I've been a nurse for a long time. I've been working for Omnipod for 5 years now.
Hi, I'm Mark Walsh with Tandem Diabetes, type 1 diabetes for 37 years. I've worn all the pumps in the U.S. and Europe and taken most of them apart. So please, I've worn all the CGMs as well. So please, bring us your questions. We'll do our best to answer them to the best that we can. That's what we're here for. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you guys all for being here. It is so incredibly much commitment, and the opportunity that we have as patients to do better and to be our best selves is so much better because they are with us.
So you've already heard from me, so I think we should go straight to the questions.
Sure, sounds good. But also, Earl, I have to say, yesterday you and I were adding up total years of diabetes lived, like in our small 4-person photo. I mean, this is just terrific. I was trying to do the math. I think we're to 200 years on the stage, so that's like pretty good, right?
Yeah.
Pretty amazing, huh? Okay, so first question, please.
Hi, my name is Elizabeth Caswell. I am a spouse of a person with type 1 and a parent of 2 children with type 1, and I think our cumulative total is around 50 years, so we're not quite 200. So what I'm interested in is, from both the CGM and the pump perspectives, what excites you about the future of the devices? What advances do you think we can look for in the future? I'm not talking about anything that's at the FDA getting approved right now, but what kinds of things do you think we're going to see grow, change, make advancements in? It's a technology field, and technology is ever-changing, so what excites you about that for the future?
Well, I know from my perspective, not just personally, but as a clinician, these things like time and range and the way that we're able to download things so freely, there's Tide Pool and all these other sorts of things that are able to get a conglomerate of data. It's just fascinating to me. When I had diabetes, we'd have to plug in the regular blood glucose meter, and that was if by chance your clinician happened to have that product software. It's just really amazing how everything is getting more streamlined. The power of the devices, the smartphones to be able to carry all of this, and the fact that I don't know how other people feel, but we often feel with type 1 diabetes, we have a diabetes tool belt that used to include some glucose and a little bit of an insulin and a blood sugar tester thing over there. And so many of these things are being slimmed down into one device. So all of that is extremely exciting, and we're all excited always about closing the loop for all the continuous glucose monitors with the pumps and things like that. Kelly, I don't know if you have some further updates that excite you in the future with regard to these things?
I can just say I got to start writing about diabetes a really long time ago. I worked on Wall Street for a bunch of years before I got to start Diatribe. And what amazed me, Dexcom started in a garage. Was it Michigan or Wisconsin? It was in Michigan, I thought that. That's so cool. We were trying to figure out how how to help people invest in that. And one of my first jobs at Close Concerns, which is the other organization that I run, was Warburg Pincus, this private equity firm, basically invested $50 million in Dexcom. And now, CGM is becoming standard of care for people who are lucky enough to get it. But what I would say is that I think as patients, I've gotten to wear CGM for a long time, but my time in range isn't nearly as good as what it should be, and especially on the hypo side, it's not as good as it could be. And I love the idea that we will be using and actually are getting to benefit from algorithms driving insulin use. Because I know we all are lucky to have amazing endocrinologists probably here, but everyone is not that lucky. And also, I have so much different things going on every day, like when I'm eating, stress, sleep, all of that. I'm just looking at my Clarity right now. The amount of insulin I took yesterday is really different from the amount of insulin I took last week. So I've gotten to try something that is going on in a clinical trial right now, Omnipod and Loop. And literally, my 90-day numbers, they're at 65% time in zone. That's not what Earl wants. But my time in range, well, but it's not as good as it could be. And I think all the time for my kids, all of us, we want to stave off long-term complications. But looking at what some of the companies are doing, and every single one of them here has something to do with getting us better about knowing what to do with all of this data or generating the data. But I just started this last weekend, but my 2-day time in range is 94%. My 7-day range, let's see what it says, is 88%. I mean, this is going to help us do better because we can't know just based on the data always what to do. So I love that everyone is working on that, whether it's inhaled insulin to do corrections so we can get things better, or where all of the CGM is going. I also love it that there is so much more recognition now, one size doesn't fit all. Even the ADA standards that came out on nutrition a couple weeks ago, even on nutrition, one size doesn't fit all. On CGM, some people really want it implanted. Some people don't want to have to, put on a new sensor every week. What all of the companies are working toward is technology as an enabler for us to have better care. Mike Hoskins also writes so much about this in Diabetes Mind. I don't know if he's in the room, but I think being able to follow the patients out there and for us all to have your support is also really special, so thank you.
Other things that are exciting too that I don't think that we perceive because we're always reflecting diabetes for ourselves, but I'll just share a clinical story with you, is that it used to take 3 months to see if you thought that the intervention was doing well, but even with type 2 diabetes, I can put continuous glucose monitors on people, and in 3 to 14 days, find out if the intervention of changing the carbohydrate ratio and all these things made a difference. And for me, that's very exciting. It's very thrilling, and the patients find that so much more rewarding as well. There's a lot more instant gratification, I think, in diabetes today than there used to be, because again, we used to anxiously await that 3-month period.
So a real quick question, comment. Kelly, and I remember this meeting, it was a JDRF meeting at the JDRF offices in New York City, and as typical with my good friend Kelly, she came in 5 minutes before we started at 8 in the morning with a red eye for a day-long meeting we had on glucose responsive insulin, smart insulins. And I want to point out this is still on the JDRF roadmap that I was just reviewing yesterday. I'm on the committee, the scientific committee, looking at the clinical trials and the clinical points for JDRF. But I think that if we had an insulin that was bound to a protein and a nanosensor so that the insulin was secreted in the blood as you needed it, and it was truly a smart insulin, wouldn't that be cool? We're not there yet, obviously, but where we are going in the very near future, and we're there now really, is the automated insulin delivery. And this has been a big focus of JDRF, of Helmsley, and of the NIH, our federal government. And one of my concerns about the whole thing is the skin. Why do some people get into so many skin problems, even as children, and other people have no problems? What is it about, whether it's the catheter, whether it's the insulin? And I haven't said this to anybody yet, but I guess got people in the room and I see the videos going, but we are getting ready to get funded. It hasn't been signed yet, but we're going to be doing a study looking at what happens under the skin in new pump users and long-term pump users, so we can understand. So hopefully, once we understand what's going on under the skin, we can do better potentially with the insulins or with the catheters, so that people can wear their pumps for years and years.
Yeah, I love
we don't know. One other thing I want to point out. In this room right now, we've been very time and range centric. 10 years ago, it would have been A1C centric, but we're certainly glucose centric. But I want to point out, for those of you who have had your diabetes for 3, 4, 5 decades, I don't want to point out that the glucose is not important. It's always important, but in priority, I would actually suggest that the blood pressure and the cholesterol and the other risk factors are more important. When you're younger, it's the glucose. As you get older, it's these other things that may or may not have any relationship to your diabetes. That's going to dictate how you do, and it's a little bit of a morbid topic, but the reality is it's still the #1 reason why people with type 1 diabetes who get through the early years and do well, the #1 cause of mortality is still cardiovascular disease. So while we're all talking about the glucose up here, I just want to point out there are these other things that we don't spend much time talking about that actually are more important, as far as having people like myself walking down the aisle in a couple of weeks with Barbara, my daughter, who's about to get married. It's these other things that actually take on more importance once you get to my age, and I'm 61.
Well, I just have a question for you, Earl, on that. I think actually Diatribe quoted you in an article in 2008 talking about cardioprotection. You know, are there other things that we can do to protect our hearts or to avoid kidney disease and all of that? And there haven't been a lot of those tests, but are there any trials that you would like to see in the future, JDRF or Helmsley or others fund, so that we know what the impact might be of different therapies on type 1?
Well, you know, I would love to see a statin trial, because, you know, right now when you turn 40 years old, the recommendations are you're going to probably go on a statin unless you have a genetically very low cholesterol. But the NIH has already said it would be unethical to do a trial like that in type 1 diabetes. It would be unethical not to give statins to somebody with a cholesterol of 180 or 240. And so we aren't going to see that. To me, Kelly...
But they're not taking it, so...
Well...
I mean, how many people here are over 40 and are taking a statin? We don't have to do necessarily
I take
no poll.
The doctors all do.
I mean, well...
Back to the question about does industry want to share anything that they find that's exciting with regard to up-and-coming events and things that keep them interested in their industries?
So I think, especially because I represent the implantable CGM, if you start thinking about what could be for the future as far as, you know, a year or longer, that you don't have to worry about whether it's pumps and infusion sets or CGMs, where it really truly is kind of turnkey, where you don't have to worry about it, and the accuracy is so good that you trust it. And so I think, as I think about the future, that's probably, you know, except for the cure, being able to actually live with closed-loop system for a long-term accuracy system, that would be, to me, that would be really exciting.
Sure.
Some things I find exciting for those of you that have lived with diabetes in your world for any period of time. You've known over the years that there have been information put out about concepts that sound very exciting but never reach reality. Well, now it seems that those things that we hear about are reaching commercialization and becoming realities, and ones that we can bring into our own world and are easy to use. I think that the products are increasingly becoming more seamless, less clunky, and just addressing also quality of life issues outside of the clinical issues, which are certainly of paramount importance. All of us are people and families too, so products seem to work well with the people's lives.
I think what's most exciting to me about looking to the future is that I love the concept of time and range. I mean, I know that we're saying it's new, but highs and lows have been around for years. And the fact that we can see them and actually take action. And then the innovations of being able to deliver whatever we need, whether it's human insulin, quickly into the bloodstream, whether it's through a device like our device with MannKind and the Dreamboat, and putting insulin into the body faster through the lung or through other ways. I'm very excited about the promise of what's coming in the future, not just with the technologies, but how the technologies and the actual medicines work together to actually solve this. And Kelly, I appreciate you sharing your time and range. We have a pool that goes on. We have an underground pool where we all put in $100 a month to figure out who has the best time and range. And we only take documentation from the CGM companies. No, we all three of them. And we have a competition, so you have to join ours because I think I'd beat you. I hit 100% for 3 days, and now I'm at like 82. So I'm,
And that's only ever happened to me on one day.
But I say that to everyone because I would say 10 years ago we didn't have this type of technology to be able to really see where we were going. We could only see where we were at that moment, whether we were going up, down, or sideways. And having those technologies will really change, to me, the outcomes. And then having other insulins and options for people. I think having options for everyone to be able to look at all the different types of options, because not one size fits all. They're all different needs across all the different classes of products that have come available, are very exciting to me. I mean, I look back at the game changers. If anyone's read the book, The Blue Ocean Strategy from Harvard Business Review, they looked at all the different innovations that came forward. And the biggest innovation in diabetes was back in the 80s when everybody went to pens. And I remember that was such a big change, and really a change for the U.S. of people shifting to pens. And then CGM came, so continuous glucose monitor, then inhaled insulin. I think that there's a lot of things in the background that are working that are going to be exciting for all of us.
All right, let's take another question.
Hi. So I have kind of a rapid-fire two-part question for those of you who currently use insulin pumps or CGMs. Before you started using any tech, what were you most scared of about starting on tech? Like, what were you wary of? And then the second part of the rapid-fire is, what's been the biggest impact on your life now that you have had CGMs or pumps?
So I'll just start. I was a late bloomer when it came to pumping insulin. I was diagnosed at 13, and I didn't get a pump until I was doing my endocrinology fellowship at approximately like age 27. And one of the things that I think I was scared of is the self-consciousness of it and wondering. I also found that I was a late bloomer to pens as well, because like, what if it ain't broke, why try to fix it? So I often tell my patients that you can get to your work in like a Ford Taurus, or you can drive a race car. You get there just the same, but each form of this technology or delivery of insulin is a little bit different. And so when I went from vial to syringe to pens, I was kind of like, why did it take me so long to figure that out, Brennan? You could have had that done a long time ago. And then similarly, when you have that jump to go from vial, syringe, or pens to pump, again, there's like this lightning bolt that hits you, kind of like, geez, that was silly that I poked myself 4 times a day instead of once every 3 days. And so I think that for me and for some is just the whole intimidation of change, right? That's probably the biggest impetus that stops you from moving forward. And then the second part of your question was? I think the arrow on the CGM is probably the biggest impact in my life now that I have it.
So I'll try to give a rapid-fire answer. So there's oftentimes hesitation for pump therapy. I have a sibling that was diagnosed 6 months before me, went on a pump, I was on shots. He would harangue me every day, you need to get on a pump, you need to get on a pump. After about 6 months of my older brother beating on me, I ordered one with the full intention of sending it back. Met with my educator, got put on the pump, and they were nowhere near as sexy as they are today. It was about the size of a VHS cassette. I got on the pump, and I haven't gone back to injection since that day, and it's been over 20 years. So that was a while back. I would say that, you know, in the time that I've had diabetes, you know, the technology in the last 24 months has changed more than it has in the last 16 years. And the two most impactful things for me was, one, switching to CGM. So I've been a Dexcom wearer every day for more than 15 years. The second big step was non-adjunctive, not poking my finger before meals. Absolute game changer. So you look back when I didn't have a meter, to having to sever a finger to get enough blood to use a meter, to now not even needing a meter. Absolutely incredible. I spent 10 days in Nepal last month, and I did not take a blood glucose meter with me overseas. If you told me 2 years ago that was going to happen, I would have said you were absolutely crazy. Those are my two.
I would totally agree. I think I'm a nurse, and for me to ever think I'd tell a patient they wouldn't have to poke their finger, I would have told you I would never say that to a patient. And today I can stand up here and say, we don't have to poke a finger anymore.
I would argue if you poke your finger, you'll screw it up.
All right, so we'll move another question, please.
Well, I do want to address the issue of this finger stick, and I think it's incredible. But you also have an option at mealtime with no fingers, you know, no finger sticks, no needles, 1,000 fewer needle sticks per year by using an inhaled insulin. So, I mean, very exciting looking as you all are talking about all the different options. You have pump, you have an inhaled insulin, you have all these different options. And I guess I would love a world where there isn't diabetes, number one. That's my dream for the future. But
Sure.
The other dream is that there's not a child or an adult that has to inject or has to do a needle stick or has to, I mean, that's my dream of what I want for patients living with this terrible disease and the caregivers that have to manage them.
Sure.
Can I make a quick comment? Everything you've heard about CGM and not checking blood sugars, it's hard to argue with that. But there's a few people in the room who remember, as wonderful as this is, and as we're making these exponential leaps in technology over the last couple of years, which is true, you have to understand, many of us here remember the world before we had finger stick glucose testing. And in my humble opinion, the biggest advance, I can look back on this now with my big binoculars, was when we started doing finger sticks and we could actually see the blood sugars, because before the early 1980s, that wasn't possible. I moved to Seattle in 1990, and I will never forget my very first academic debate with a primary care physician who said, patients won't do finger sticks, you're wasting your time, it's painful, they don't know what to do with the information, why would you prescribe that, why would you waste the money? And that was in 1990. And so if you think about that, because that wasn't really that long ago, and you look at where we are now, I'd like to talk to that physician today.
I'd also like to make one comment too, is that all of these things sound wonderful, right? But we also have to understand, and I think Earl probably more than anybody knows, that the world does not have access to all these technologies. And there are some people in this country that don't have access to these technologies.
Insulin.
And I think that we also can't undervalue the fact that vial, syringe, even regular, even NPH, though that sounds going way back in time in the time machine, poking your finger 24 times a day, whatever, you can achieve the targets and the goals that you need to get to have a healthy life with diabetes. So I don't want people to walk out of here and think that they have to chastise anybody that's staying on those methodologies of controlling their diabetes, or that maybe a loved one doesn't want to advance to the technologies that are available. If somebody's A1C is to control, if their time and range is reasonable using the past technologies, this is a completely reasonable method as well. We would say that we'd like to see those things, but again, this is maybe more for parents and children and their discussions or discussions with loved ones. Sometimes making these changes is hard. Okay.
One of the cooler things that has come out of the CGM technology and then also being uploaded to the cloud has been seeing what some of the amateur programs out there in like the homebrew community have done with something like Night Scout and the like, where people can have these things connect, so you'll have a smart light bulb in your house turn red if your kid's blood sugar has gone high or something along that lines. But all that stuff is really bootstrapped together. You know, something like I haven't been able to figure it out, and I'd like to think I'm not too big of an idiot. Are there efforts from the technology community as a whole, or the companies in specific, to make that data a little more accessible? And I know there's security, concerns involved in that, but I wanted to know if there's any possibility of having that a little more accessible than having to try to set up your own thing and basically fooling the servers from Dex or Medtronic or whatever, just saying, "Oh yeah, no, I'm totally your software."
So that's a tough question because that's a lot of off-label talk with regard to what's going on. But there are methods with which you can, what are quote-unquote jailbreak these systems, have all those sorts of things. And I can only say, from what little I know about it, is that there are conglomerates of data at each one of these companies with their CGM things, looking at holistic population health and how people are doing with those things, and how come some people are able to titrate better and titrate less. But I think for most of us, we're not going to have access to those databases per se from each of the industrial companies. But as you well know, I think that the web offers a variety of methods to do these sorts of things. They do have caveats and they certainly have dangers, but certainly can be successful as well. I don't know.
So I think one of the biggest restrictions you see with insulin delivery and cloud-based data today is that the delivery devices are not connected to the internet for the most part. So as we see things progress with the FDA and get into more applications running on mobile devices that are constantly connected to the internet, that's when the integration becomes much more accessible, real-time access to data, things like that. So that need is absolutely there. And I think you're going to see, over time, you'll see a lot of the pumps communicating to a phone. And then eventually, I think that holy grail is to have the phone actually functioning as the pump. And once it's on the phone, then you can start getting to a more robust cloud database. But today, none of the pumps can go directly to the internet to share that data. So we got to have that bridge over to the mobile device.
And all of the insulin delivery companies and CGM companies are working together on that. It's just the FDA's main job is to have things be safe. Innovation is part of their role, though, as well. And I'm so excited that all of the companies are working on this. And it is being propelled by, the patient, many patients in the sort of hashtag We Are Not Waiting community. At Diatribe, you can go to diatribe.org/loop if you just want to learn more about it. But it's really interesting. I mean, my husband set me up on one. I don't have the patience to do it, but to learn all of that stuff, to learn to be a coder, you do have to do that. It is off-label, but there's a lot of stuff that is being, Jeff Hitchcock, who's, head of children with diabetes, always says life isn't lived off-label. So I think it's been interesting to see what the patient communities have propelled, and my husband set up the one for me on Omnipod last weekend. I mean, even that one, it was easier than doing it 3 years ago. It doesn't mean that that is right for everybody, but I think having the opportunity and for the FDA to see that happening out there, they're psyched about it. Tidepool is doing this trial, and every single one of the notes with all of the FDA is on the web. And I think a lot of this has opened up, and seeing the community working together is really cool.
Next question.
Okay, I appreciate time and target approach, and I understand it. My question is more how to achieve time and target, because I do have continuous glucose monitor, and I have all my tools like long-term insulin, short-term insulin, but still I cannot reach target because, and it started to be a case recently, because the more I trying to reach the target goes away from me. So I'm kind of getting desperate in this situation, and to me, it's like insulin resistance keep increasing. So I'm already using more than 150 units of insulin a day, and it's still I cannot reach my target all the day.
So
I can reach it most of the time, but not, for example, in the morning.
So obviously I can't answer all your clinical questions for you as an individual at this time, But in general, I think that maybe the talking point would be that it is tough for our time and range, and it does change as we age. Earl was speaking to that maybe there's a geriatric population that you have to adjust because of safety reasons for the hypoglycemia at that time, that you may not be as aggressive. Also, other things, with obesity, even in type 1 diabetes, we can progress to needing more insulin and have insulin resistance. I think that's often an underlooked portion of type 1 diabetes. That furthermore, there's other medications that are added, such as glucocorticoids, or also known as steroids, and these things bring insulin resistance with us as we grow and age. So all of these things contribute, and I'm sorry to hear like that it's not always easy to get the time and range, but I find it very difficult myself too. And it does seem like sometimes it's a moving target. I don't know if any other clinical advice with regard to that.
Well,
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Well, I was just saying, with the concentrated insulin, Omnipod is working on getting FDA approval. We have 2 studies going on right now with the U500 and the U200 to help with those patients who are dealing with that insulin resistance. And
So just to clarify for people in the room, insulin is based on how much microcrystallized insulin is in the solution. So there are other insulins that in the past were developed because people had antibodies to insulin when they used pork and bovine insulins. And so we had to have very concentrated insulin. As it turns out now, with obesity and gaining insulin resistance in the United States, that concentrated insulin, meaning there's more crystalline insulin in a smaller volume of liquid, is now available more freely in the market. It's called U200 and U500 insulins. You've also heard of maybe U300. This just means that there's more crystal insulin particles in that smaller space. And so there are developments that we're talking about now in which you can possibly, we have as clinicians in very insulin-resistant patients, put that concentrated insulin in pumps or patches or other methods. And so, but there isn't really FDA approval for any of this. So they're fortunately studying that. So those are options to treat insulin resistance too. As you age, with pump technology is the possibility of concentrated insulin.
I was just going to say, if you're taking 150 units of insulin a day, that's a lot of insulin for someone your height and weight. And we see this a lot. We especially see it in people with type 1 diabetes who have family members, and we see it in certain ethnicities. We see a lot of insulin resistance. Where I live in the Pacific Northwest, we see a lot of Asian Americans, and their diabetes is different because they tend to be very insulin resistant, but they're more insulin deficient than the Caucasian obese patients. And they're not obese, but they're deficient and they're resistant at the same time. And it's very difficult because they eat so much rice, and trying to keep their blood sugars down, it becomes very frustrating when they're looking at CGMs. I think the point is that we see insulin resistance. There are easy ways to try to treat it. There are more difficult ways when it comes to medications. It's one of my frustrations is we have all these wonderful medications in type 2 diabetes. It is often difficult to get them, especially the non-generic ones. We have some patients who they will not give up their metformin, a cheap generic drug for type 2 diabetes. It works very well in type 1 patients who are very insulin resistant. And then my final comment, it was a young lady I was seeing this week. She's getting ready to get married, and everything sort of fit. I've been seeing her for a long time, but she gets her care from another healthcare system, so I don't get to see everything going on. And she tells me she takes her insulin, but she's had a history of an eating disorder in the past. Her blood sugars are always high. Her CGM she doesn't have much time in range, but something really interesting happened to a technology point of view. We got her the companion InPen. It's a smart pen. And I could now see, because every time she doses with the pen, it Bluetooths the information to an app on her phone, and we can download it, and we can actually see. And she's taking huge doses of insulin. And I go, I didn't think she was taking the insulin. So then I put her on the exam table, I look behind her neck, and she has these dark hyperpigmented areas, which are acanthosis nigricans is the medical term. That means she's very resistant to insulin. And I'm going, why are you so resistant to insulin? And then I went back, have you ever had ketoacidosis? So all the questions. Turns out, the reason why she's so resistant to insulin, she has polycystic ovarian syndrome, which she has completely treated. A lot of times, these ladies get very hairy. She had no hair on her body. She took care of all of that, but I missed it. And she was doing everything right, but I didn't know it until I saw the smart pen. She was actually taking her insulin. And to be fair, she wasn't always taking her insulin. This is relatively new. Right. And so, but she is, so we see insulin resistance in type 1 diabetes. It's not all that uncommon.
Right, they're not mutually exclusive, that's for sure. Next question.
Hi there. So I've had type 1 diabetes for 22 years myself. Been very fortunate, as many of you have mentioned, to have been on a pump since 2002. And I've been on a Dexcom almost 10 years now. And we've talked about how there's a lot of maybe privilege and good luck that goes into that. And so I was wondering if there's anything that any of you are focusing on that is either lower cost interventions for people with type 1 diabetes that are also technology based. That's kind of what I do in my line of work. I work in public health. And then so lower cost interventions and then steps you're taking to increase access to what you already have out there.
I think I'll defer to the industry because I know you guys are doing a lot of things to like lower costs with regard, and I know from our patient experience that what's amazing about all of the drug companies and the durable medical equipment companies is that if there are people in this country that can't qualify, there are oftentimes solutions that we can find. I don't know exactly what the programs always are, but there are medical assistance programs and things like that for each individual maker of medicines, as well as I think that a lot of these companies with the pumps and things like that will give assistance to get you started and things like that.
Yeah, so we're, as you know, a fairly relatively new company in the U.S. Last year we were just approved, and we currently, we're still working through a lot of the insurances, and many of them cover the Eversense. But right now we have a $99, it's called a bridge program, to make it affordable for those insurances that are still kind of saying, okay, you know, well, let's think about it. Right. So for 6 months, basically, there'd be 2 opportunities of $99 for that. So we're trying to, you know, build that.
And for commercial patients with Afrezza, we have, if you're a commercial patient, you'll pay as little as $15. We have a copay card for that. And then for any kind of government patients, we have a program where you can go into with Assembia. They work with your payers to ensure that you get free product if you need it. In addition, we have a cash program because some people, you know, they choose, there are all different types of health plans. I think the other challenge we have in the U.S. healthcare system is people are choosing high deductible plans. They're growing by about 30% a year. So, you know, people choose a plan that might have a lower payment, but then when they go to get their medications or their devices, their copays are very large, their percentages. And we're seeing that phenomena, and I want to make sure that every patient has access to whatever care they need and whatever care that Dr. Hirsch and you feel like is best for a patient. We want to make sure people have access to it. So we also have a cash program. We were the first company manufacturer that came out with a $99 cash program for our product for a month's supply of Afrezza. And we're very proud of that because we want to make sure that patient access is absolutely essential. And I think as the high deductible plans grow, there's going to be more of a need to do that. And I see manufacturers stepping up to do that. It's the right thing to do, but we've got to some way address the larger issue that people have access to all their options because every option doesn't work for every patient, and that they can afford to get it when they are given the option to have it.
Yeah, unfortunately, you know, we always have access to care as an issue. And also there's creative answers. Regular insulin can be put in insulin pumps and things like that. So we don't always have to have the analog insulins and things like that. There was quite a long time prior to rapid acting insulin that we used quite regularly in the insulin pumps. So these are options as well.
Yeah, I just want to say one quick thing about that. I think also there are many different kinds of patients. Some patients can do okay on regular insulin. Many can't, and so like you don't want to just have people use regular and then end up in the emergency room and all of that. I mean, before I got an analog, I was in the emergency room 24 times in 12 years. There is a major problem with even medical school education and all of the doctors being able to learn to use regular insulin. Everybody knows like there's a real time problem in doctors getting to spend enough time with patients. So I wouldn't want to go overboard on that.
No,
I think
I'm
it's
not-
important for us
right.
collectively as patients
I would
to
think
be
we
able
still
to
need
communicate.
advocacy to stay on the latest and greatest. This is for sure.
Yeah.
And we should have access to all if possible, but it's not always possible for everyone.
Yeah, at diatribe.org/access, we really keep up to date about the different programs that are out there, and it has been patient advocacy, Dr. Hirsch leading everyone on this. There have been some companies who are definitely moving the dial in a major way, putting their best products on the patient access program. Sanofi does that of the insulin companies. We hope to see the other ones follow it. Sanofi also makes it possible if you need 5 bottles or 1 bottle, it's the same price. And so if that's the insulin that you get, it is more possible. I also think that if you guys could please work with, I don't know, I know you don't have coffee like every Friday at 3 or anything, and there are constraints on that. But if the patient access programs are easier to fill out, because many doctors, a very good friend of Earl said to me recently, I throw all those forms away. Because I know they're not going to get it. And that's not a good attitude to have. So being able to make it easier to fill out the forms and then you working with healthcare providers as well is important.
Okay, one last question, and then just so that you're aware, our host there will, if you have any questions that you want to write down, I myself and Kelly possibly as well, and maybe Earl, but I will help facilitate answering any questions that we didn't get to if you want to write them down. Go ahead.
Mike, I just wanted to clarify something that I think you said about regular insulin going into insulin pumps. Regular insulin used to come in a buffered form called Velocilin, and that could go in pumps because it was buffered. But regular insulin typically precipitates in the tubing of the pumps, and so people don't get consistent dosing on regular insulin when it's put in pumps. So it's not as good.
I agree that it's not as good. I wasn't saying that it was as good. I was just saying that it has been an option that's been used.
Yeah, the Velocilin isn't on the market anymore, so that was what was actually the regular that was made for pumps.
Mm-hmm. Any other one last question, comments? Okay, one. Okay, so you want to just announce, this is the industry panel and where they work?
Dexcom.
Eversense.
Mankind.
Medtronic.
Omnipod.
Tandem.
And thank you guys for all
Yes,
being
thank you
here and
for all being
everything
here.
that you're trying to do, and Dr. Brennan and Dr. Hirsch.
Enjoy the rest of the day. Thank you.